welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am Jessica, your host, and I am really excited to welcome back the author of the Horrible Bag series, who wrote a book which is just so perfect in tone for anybody. It's a middle grade read. Anybody, though, would enjoy it. It's got some horror, it's got some humor, it's got pretty much everything and a lot of twists and turns. Please introduce yourself and tell us about the terrible Tower of Endless Torment.
Hi, I'm Rob Renzetti, and I'm an author. I'm also an animation veteran. I've worked on a lot of TV animation, including going way back Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls and Samurai Jack. More recently, I've worked on Big City Greens for Disney and Gravity Falls, also for Disney. And most recently, my biggest gig recently was second command on Kid Cosmic, my college friend and roommate, Craig McCracken's latest show, which was on Netflix and still is on Netflix. So I've done a lot in animation. I started writing books a while back. The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things was my first original, and The Twisted Tower of Endless Torment is the follow-up, the second in a series of which is, for now at least, slated to be 3. So it's second book in a trilogy.
You know, you just answered a question for me. I was going to ask, how much longer do we get to spend with Zenith and Apogee in the land of GrahBhag? Because I adored it. And just for listeners, we actually did a little pre-interview because one of my sons finished the first book seconds before I got on this Zoom call with Rob, and just absolutely had to tell him how much he adored it. My son is 9 years old, and
there you go.
Yeah. So, if you enjoy middle grade or you have a middle grader, they will love it straight from the kid's mouth. But I really wanted to know, because when I did read the second book, I wanted to know immediately, how much do you have planned out for this world? This is, as you said, the second book in this series. It begins not too long after the first one ended, but spoiler alert, Zenith and Apogee have switched. Now, Apogee is the little sibling. Zenith is the older sibling. And
yes,
that has caused some turmoil in their relationship, even though in the beginning, Zenith cannot remember why exactly. He knows there's something, it's scratching at the back of his head. But obviously, the world of GrahBhag is not done with himself, and Apogee is not done with it either. So immediately, when I saw the second book coming out, I got really excited, and I did want to know, so this is going to be a trilogy.
Yes. At one point, I imagined I wouldn't be able to squeeze the rest of the story into just one more book, but I've been working on that third book, and I've managed to squeeze it in, and that's good, because that's all Penguin Workshop hired me to do. For now, could there be other stories in GrahBhag? Certainly. It's a big world, and lots of stuff has happened. There's history we haven't delved into. Though, spoiler alert, for the third book, we do get to see a little bit, or we get to learn a little bit about the history of events that happened before Zenith and Apogee ever came to this world. This main story and the relationship between Apogee and Zenith and the story that they're on kind of wraps up in the third book, which I'm ready to start the third draft of basically right now. I just got notes back from Penguin on draft 2. I'm going into draft 3. So I'm literally writing the third book starting the minute I get off this interview. So there's going to be 3 for now, maybe more later on if it becomes a popular thing. But I've lived with this world for a very long time. I started writing or thinking about the first book back in like 2017, maybe even 2016. So it's kind of strange to not have things to work on. So I'm kind of looking forward to diving back into the third book. But after that, it'll be on hold for a while, and I'll have to think about what I'm going to do next. Maybe something non-GrahBhagian. I've got a couple different ideas. We'll see if anyone bites on any of them. It was designed to be a trilogy. It was actually originally I just had one book in mind. And when I got my literary agent, he asked me, do you see this as one book or do you see it as more? And I said, I think it could be 3 books. And so he said, well, write that up. So that was always part of the original proposal to Penguin Workshop, which was they got the full manuscript for the first book and then a description of the second and third book, and they bought all 3. So I was very lucky, very pleased. I was very surprised and excited.
I was very excited as well to see that this was going to be a series. And it was very different than the first one in that now, and this is kind of something we don't always see in these series, especially middle grade series, Zenith must sort of face the consequences of some of the things that he did in the first book. And he actually is put on trial, which is where the title, The Terrible Tower of Endless Torment, comes in. So in a way, it's a little bit of that. He's drawn back into this world. He sees how things have shifted based on what happened in the first book and some of the choices he made. And aside from that, he has to answer for his crimes. And there is a bit of, I suppose, a prison break aspect of it as well, which was very, very fun. When you were planning this out as the second in the series, did that part naturally come? Or was that like just one of those early morning moments when you're just like, wait a second, what would happen if he was put on trial for these things that he did?
I mean, I think when we talked last fall, I mean, we talked a little bit about the second book, and I said, I mentioned Alice in Wonderland as an influence, and I said, there's going to be a trial scene in the second book. And so I had that in mind pretty early on. That was kind of the central scene that I kind of built the book around. I really wanted to do my version of the Alice in Wonderland trial because I've always loved that scene in the book. I just love the absurdity of it and how it turns kind of everything on its head, which Alice in Wonderland does all over the place, and was definitely an inspiration for me writing these books. So I was very excited to write the trial scene. It was one of my favorite things to write in the second book. So yeah, it was always kind of designed that he would be an outlaw in the second book, that like there would, like you said, there would be consequences to what he did in the first book. Like the world doesn't forget about him, it very much remembers him. And I don't want to spoil too much about the first book, but he does things that have huge consequences for the world of GrahBhag. And so when he comes back, he is a known criminal. He is the dread outlaw Maelstrom, and he's wanted, dead, alive, or eaten. And actually, that was my first rough title for the second book, was Wanted, Dead, Alive, or Eaten. But Penguin kind of wanted to follow the rhythm of Horrible Bag of Terrible Things in all three of the books and kind of make that. And I'm glad they did, because I'm happy with Twisted Tower of Endless Torment. I love the rhythm of that title. So I don't regret changing the title, but the idea that he was an outlaw, that he would be put on trial, that we'd be sent to prison, those were all ideas that were kind of there from very, very early on. So yeah, that idea was pretty much the first thing I came up with, and I kind of built everything around that.
I love the trial so much, and I love that it has that Alice in Wonderland influence. I'm a huge fan of, and I know we talked about this last time, because I think that was when I mentioned to you that weird Alice in Wonderland that was on television.
Yes.
I don't know if
I've tried to find that. I haven't had a lot of luck. I think my wife is she's our entertainment master, and we have Netflix, we have Amazon. She also has subscriptions to like 2 local libraries. We go to the library all the time. We get most of our DVDs from the library these days, actually, since Netflix stopped sending them out. But we still have our streaming subscription, so we kind of follow our inspiration and go back. But that is we're trying to hunt that down. It's definitely something that I'd want to see. I also discovered recently that, this is off topic a little bit, but that Tim Burton had done a Hansel and Gretel special in the, I think it was the late 80s, early 90s, something like that. It's really weird and off kilter in the same kind of way. And I saw scenes from that. There was some YouTube video I stumbled on that showed a good portion of it. So that was kind of fun to see. But yeah, no, Alice in Wonderland's huge inspiration for this series, and the trial scene was touchstone and one of my favorite things to write. What I didn't figure on was how much fun I would have once I got Zenith to prison. I had less ideas with that going in, but I struck upon the idea of basically just looking, at the prison movies I'd seen and all the kind of stereotypes of the kind of different characters that are always in prison movies, and I kind of leaned into that. As you probably discovered, like all the prisoners he meets are kind of they're like so stereotypical that they're actually named after the stereotype. Like Loose Lips is this little rat human hybrid character who can't stop talking and always blows everybody's secrets. There's a character named Musclehead who's got huge muscles so large that his head is actually obscured within the musculature of his upper body. Sticky Fingers is a 5-armed pickpocket who actually has a glue on her fingertips and can't help but grab things. So once I discovered kind of that idea of like, let's lean into every prison stereotype you ever thought of, I was able to come up with like kind of a motley crew of prisoners for him to encounter. So I had a lot of fun in the prison part of the book because of those characters that I came up with. And also another huge influence on this book, and sorry if I keep rambling, just interrupt me, but the art of M.C. Escher was a huge inspiration for this book. The prison, the physical prison that he's in, the tower, is actually just a series of like meant to be MC Escher like puzzles and stuff. Like the exterior of the tower itself is a series of stairwells that you can walk on right side up or upside down. Like gravity will shift in whichever way will most bedevil you. And there's other traps waiting for Zenith inside that like just defy the laws of physics and the laws of gravity. So it's impossible to escape. Nobody gets put in a cell. Nobody needs to be jailed tonight because the tower itself won't let you get out. If you think you found a hole to dig out of and it'll turn into a ring or into a tube, or if you think this giant stairwell is going to lead to the top of the tower and you'll be able to get out from there, that stairwell will somehow, after climbing 15 flights, you'll be back on flight 1. So there's all these weird MC Escher-esque traps inside. And I kind of set myself a challenge of like, well, how can I, those things are very visual. Let's see if I can describe them in prose.
I am really glad you talked about that. And I read in your notes that MC Escher was a huge influence. This also reminded me very much of Labyrinth in that way. I believe
Yes.
also borrows from
Yes.
MC Escher, that iconic scene with Jareth and Sarah. The prisoners almost reminded me of the characters that Sarah would meet in the Labyrinth as well. So, I mean, which is wonderful, because how could you get any better than that? But no, it really was just sort of a wonderfully living, strange prison, and it fits so well into the world. And I liked just the relationship between Zenith and Apogee, even though she's younger. They have that relationship. They need each other. But there's this really strange shift of responsibility that goes back and forth between the two of them. And
Yeah.
there are parts of this book that blew my mind, and I don't want to say what they are because I was like, what? How's that? I did not see that coming, which was great. Especially, I'm a huge thriller reader myself, so I feel like I'm always looking for that angle, and things happened, and I was like, that just hit me in the head, but it makes perfect sense. So I want to just commend you on that.
Thank you.
Not only was the book fun, it was just surprising, and it did hold up that great, eerie, creepy feeling that, I mean, I know that myself as a child and myself now really likes, and obviously children as well. So
let's hope. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm always happy when someone says like, I didn't see that twist coming, because obviously I can. Once I think of them, right? It's always hardest to know, like, it seems obvious to me because I know it all, but it's the same with my history in animation, where like you come up with a gag and you think it's funny. You just came up with it and oh, that's funny, I'll do that. And then you have to sit with that gag for over and over and over again and watch it, see it again and again as you write it or draw the storyboard, and then see the finished cartoon and put the sound effects to it and do the editing. And you're like, is this funny anymore? You know what I mean? And you just really have to rely on that first instinct where you have that first natural reaction and go like, I thought it was funny when I first thought of it. I'm going to trust that it's still funny now. So the same with these twists and turns that I come up with, like, I know them, I know where they're coming, but like, I've got to rely on the fact that I think it was clever when I thought of it, and not overthink it and think, well, I've got to do it different now because it seems stale. That's the joy is coming up with it. The burden is like living with it through the creative process. But the other joy of it is how you write it. When you're writing your book, the idea, like, you have to express that idea on a page. So you get to come at it from that degree, and like, am I doing this idea the service it deserves? Like, am I explaining it the best way? Am I doing it the best way? So, I mean, obviously that's where draft 2, draft 3, draft 4 comes in, is you are constantly refining it. So as opposed to a cartoon where sometimes you just have to come up with your first iteration and you got to move on, you got to get it on the air, you got other cartoons to do. It's nice to kind of sit with one book for a while and just be able to take a break from it, look at it with fresh eyes, and see if you can do it better. So I do really enjoy the editing process and the refining process. I don't find it a burden to have to go back into the book. I do find it a joy to rewrite as well as write.
So that actually makes me think of another question. If this was to become a different type of media, would you see it more as an animation or a live action piece?
I mean, I'd take whatever anybody would give me, obviously. The last few years in animation have
sure.
been kind of slow. I always imagined that it might end up as like a 3-season miniseries on Netflix or Amazon or something like that. It's very much built in the like kind of old serial version of entertainment, right? Where not every chapter, but most chapters end in some sort of cliffhanger, or at least something to drive you on to read the next chapter. I designed it that way. It's unabashedly that. I don't apologize for that. Like I think that's fun for kids. I think it's an interesting way to tell stories. It's like, yeah, I'm pushing things so that you are urged to move on because you've got to figure out what's going to happen next. So originally, I would love to have seen it as a like miniseries or something, an animated miniseries. I think it would be a great series of movies as well. I love animation, so I would love to see it as animation. But if Guillermo del Toro wanted to do a live action version of it, sign me up, of course. I'd love to see what he would do with the property. So, we'll see what happens. Right now, I've just been thinking about it as a book, and I hope it'll have a life beyond that. But you never know. Things are as topsy-turvy in the real world as they are in GrahBhag right now. So at least in the entertainment industry, we don't know what's going to come next.
For sure. No, without a doubt. It is just a really fun story, and the world feels very, again, very lived in and very just reminiscent of those fun, sort of darker Henson properties from when I was a kid that really just sort of grabbed the attention of, I guess, the weird kids back then,
Yeah.
but, have sort of a life of their own.
I mean, that would be another way to
Yeah.
go. I mean, if Henson were interested in doing some sort of puppet version of this, I'd be thrilled. I'd be over the moon. I've always loved Jim Henson stuff, going back all the way to Sesame Street and ever since, So yeah, I mean, anybody that would come to me that I respected as a creator, I would love to see their version of it, and whatever level of involvement they'd want me to be involved in, I'd be overjoyed to participate in. But part of the joy of kind of creating something and then leaving it out in the world is seeing what other people do with it and seeing the different iterations and where they come in at things from. I mean, I've had that experience with Teenage Robot now, especially since I've been on Twitter, which is, I see a lot of fan art and fan ideas about the show that never would have occurred to me, and different iterations of the style and all that. And obviously the fact that it's not forgotten and fall into complete obscurity is a joy for me as a creator, to be looking at stuff 20 years later and now writing these characters again 20 years later for my newsletter. So I would love to be involved in some sort of live action animated version. If that worked out, I'd also hand it over to Guillermo del Toro or Jim Henson gladly and see what they did with it. It's been a real joy to having worked collaboratively for so long. And there's some collaboration on this book as well with my readers, and my wife has had actually a huge contribution in terms of giving me her notes and stuff like that. But it is more or less a solo project where I'm sitting in a room alone typing this stuff out. That's been an interesting change of pace, and I've really enjoyed it. But seeing a more collaborative version of it would be exciting as well.
So, were there any characters in this book that became one of your favorites? Maybe a new one, or
Yeah. Yes. I mean, Krebo remains a favorite for me. I mean, she's probably my series overall favorite. But in this particular book, Hardy and Hazel, the two guards at the prison, they were an unexpected treat that I didn't have at first. When I never really thought of him as a warden, but the one guard that's in the prison, and I didn't really have a take on him. And then I came up with his sister Hazel. Again, that was one of those moments where I'm like, oh, that's it. That's what I got to do. And I got so much mileage out of bringing Hazel into the mix. And became one of my favorite characters to write because of the contrast between the two of them, and because their brother-sister relationship in a way again reflects back on Apogee and Zenith, which is, of course, that's the emotional core of these books, is what's going on between Apogee and Zenith and how their relationship is changing and what it does do to their dynamic now that Zenith is the older one, how much he changes, how much his personality changes, how much Apogee's personality changes, how they kind of reverse roles and he becomes the responsible one and she becomes reckless. And the origins, some of which get revealed, and how Zenith is struggling with that, and whether it's really the right thing for them to try and return to the ages as they were before all these adventures begin, or whether there's maybe a different solution. That question is raised and will be answered in the third book,
which I cannot wait for.
You will have to wait.
No,
but I will send. If you like, I will send you an advance copy like you got the Untwisted Tower, and we can do this again next year.
Please, absolutely. And by that point, I'm sure that he will be 10 at that point. We'll be very happy to give you his review of everything.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
really did love the book, and I did catch that sibling dynamic. It was very nice to see sort of a reflection and a GrahBhagian reflection of it as well between those characters. I did really enjoy it. And there's a lot more I want to say, but they're all spoilers, so I'm not spoiling anything. So all I'm going to say is read it. Read it, read it, read it. If you have not read, or your family has not read, your child has not read The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things. Am I mixing it up now? I think I did.
No, that's right. It's The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things. The
Right.
second one is The Twisted Tower of Endless Torment.
Yeah, I'm getting the T's and the H's all mixed
Yeah,
up.
believe me, I got them mixed up myself for a while. There was a point where it was the Terrible Tower, but they wanted us to move a little bit. I was gonna make it the Horrible Tower of Terrible Torment. Like all of them were gonna have horrible and terrible in the title, and Penguin wanted us to move off that a little bit, which is good because the third book is tentatively titled, and I think I can say this. I don't think this is disallowed. The working title right now is The Cursed Cloak of the Wretched Wraith. So you can tell Gavin that's the third book that he doesn't have his hands on yet. But yeah, The Cursed Cloak of the Wretched Wraith, that's the working title. I think that's almost final. It's going through Penguin's last round of review right now. So
I cannot wait to read it, and especially just reading this book and being like, oh, that's such a perfect title. I'm really excited about it. Well, thank you so, so much. This was awesome. As I was saying, make sure that you read The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things and The Terrible Tower of Endless Torment. They are both really, really good. I like how different they are, but they maintain the tone and the pace, and it's wonderful. And Rob Renzetti, I am so happy to talk to you again.
thank you, Jessica. It was a pleasure talking with you.
So once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast, and we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.